Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's Writers Workshop. My name is Salim and I will be serving as your host tonight and will help navigate questions. Our topic tonight is character development, presented by editor and writer Ekta Garg. Before I introduce Ekta, I do want to share a few updates about the library. So as you may know, we are open and back to our regular hours. However, if you don't feel comfortable coming into the library just yet, we are still continuing our curbside delivery service. This is where you can request items at home and pick them up in front of the library during designated hours. For more information on that, you can visit champaign.org/curbside. If you have questions for staff, there are a few ways you can connect with us. You can schedule a consultation at champaign.org/book-a-librarian. You can chat with us anytime we're open. Our chat feature is located on our website at the bottom of the page. And you can email us at librarian@champaign.org. I'd also like to share a few instructions for communicating through Zoom tonight. So depending on your device, at the bottom of the screen towards the center, you should see the option to chat. This is where you can type your question in. Next to that is the option to raise your hand if you'd prefer to use your microphone, and I will unmute you. We ask that you hold all your questions for Ekta until the end of her presentation, and she will address them then. With that said, I'd like to now introduce our presenter. Ekta began her career in publishing, working as the editor for Pamplin Media Group in Portland, Oregon. Since then, she has written and edited in multiple areas, including healthcare, home improvement, and Hindi films. In 2010, Ekta added blogging to her resume by starting The Right Edge. This is where you can find her short fiction, book reviews, and parenting adventures. The Right Edge also serves as a tool for fellow writers who hire Ekta to edit their writing projects. Tonight, she's here to share some tips for developing your characters. Ekta, thank you again for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Salim. I really appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. I am just going to share my screen so you can see my slides and get this started for you. Then we will be ready to start. All right, once again, good evening. My name is Ekta Garg, and I am so glad you could join us online tonight to talk about character development. I heard someone say once that great plots make great books, but great characters make great careers. I know that there might be some debate about that, but there's no denying the fact that as readers and even writers, we love a good, solid character. After all, it's our protagonists and antagonists who act as our eyes and ears into the story worlds we create. Their supporting characters give voice to all the other thoughts and ideas we might have had about the problems our main characters encounter. So having someone you can root for or even boo for an entire story or novel is essential if we want to keep our readers glued to their seat. As Salim mentioned, I got my start in publishing by way of journalism. As I went through undergraduate and then graduate school, the digital revolution was just starting to pick up steam. I'm sure if I were to go back today, the curriculum on the surface would look vastly different. There's one thing, though, that I think will never change in any journalistic medium, and that is the need to tell a compelling story and to do it well. To that end, since almost the beginning of time, journalists have relied on a basic formula to build the foundations of their stories: the 5 W's and an H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. And even though we associate these questions with journalism and the news, we use the same tools in short stories and novels. The 5 W's and the H appear in every element of our writing. That includes building solid characters. We'll get a little more into detail into the H, or the how, in a few minutes. But first, I want to do a quick review of the fundamental elements of characters using the 5 W's. So let's get started. The first W we encounter is who. Who are we talking about? The easy answer, of course, is our characters. People who populate our stories and who lead us through their biggest challenges only to be transformed by the end. Underneath the who are we talking about question, though, is another W that needs to be answered. Who are we going to choose to tell our story? Sometimes the answer is an obvious one. J.K. Rowling says that when she first got the idea for the Harry Potter series on a train in London, the flood of ideas began with Harry himself. Here's what she shared with Bookster.com. I could see Harry very clearly, this scrawny little boy, and it was the most physical rush of excitement. I've never felt that excited about anything to do with writing. Given that the series was, in the broadest sense, about good versus evil, Rowling could have chosen anyone, but she chose Harry because it wasn't enough just to talk about the good wizards and the bad wizards. She needed an emotional anchor, someone we'd root for all the way from the Sorcerer's Stone to the Deathly Hallows. So she chose a boy who needed a family and desperately wanted love and a strong support system. He found that in Hogwarts and, oh, by the way, just happened to be the chosen one to lead the good versus evil fight. Rowling chose Harry because he's the one who will be the anchor with all the universal emotions. We've all felt unloved or neglected at times. We can all identify with Harry's loneliness and isolation. Rowling made conscientious choices to build Harry with those universal feelings and then make them even bigger and bolder. Once we see that Harry is essentially like any one of us, it's really easy for us to suspend all disbelief and buy into the entire wizarding world. If Rowling had chosen to go with Ron Weasley, Harry's best friend, instead of Harry himself, the books would have progressed on a wildly different track, and it's possible they might not have been quite so successful. Ron and Harry share some similarities, like they're both studying at Hogwarts and they both feel the need to stand up for people and creatures who can't stand up for themselves. But Ron comes from a loving, full household. He doesn't feel the level of quiet desperation that Harry does. He would have probably been a fairly likable protagonist, but I don't think he would have drawn the same heart-deep reaction like Harry does. Another thing to consider is who is in the best position to lead readers through the story, whether by their age, their position in society or a particular culture, or even their species. In the middle grade book, The One and Only Ivan, author Catherine Applegate chose to make her main character a gorilla. She drew inspiration for her book on the true story of a gorilla that was captured in the Democratic Republic of Congo and brought to Tacoma, Washington to be put in a mini zoo inside a mall. In the book, Ivan the gorilla has friends that are, of course, other animals. Bob, a dog with a lot of opinions, and Ruby, a sweet baby elephant scared about being brought to the mall to join the mini zoo. Ivan also has human friends. George, the janitor who cleans the mall, and his daughter Julia, who comes after hours to be with her father and work on her homework, both see that Ivan is more than just something to be on display. They make a connection with all of the animals, but their relationship with Ivan stands out throughout the book. If Applegate had wanted, she could have told Ivan's story through Julia's eyes. After all, the connection between children and animals goes back a long way and has always been special. Applegate could have chosen George as the main character, but then the story would have been about him and Julia and would have had to balance their home lives as much as Ivan's story. From the beginning, the author was clear on the fact that she wanted Ivan to be the star. The easiest way to do that was to make him the main character, even though many writing experts will warn against giving animals human-like qualities. They give this advice because it's so hard to do well. It's hard to do without making the story sound cheesy or preachy. But The One and Only Ivan isn't either one of these things. It's a thoughtful, careful story of a gorilla who learns as much about himself as he does about the humans around him. In the hands of Catherine Applegate, Ivan is the right protagonist to tell the story of captive animals and the relationship they share with humans. Applegate strikes the perfect balance between making Ivan completely gorilla, yet relatable. So when you're choosing your main characters, always ask yourself, who's going to tell the story? Who will have the most to share about the world you've created? Who will connect to the reader best because of the conscientious choices you make as the writer? The second W is what, as in what is the story about? At first glance, that might not seem like it has much to do with characters, but it actually does. For example, on the surface, the movie Tangled is about a girl who wants the answer to a question and a boy who wants to earn some quick cash. That's really it. Now, if we were just to leave it at that, we could probably use the same description to talk about any number of stories. One thing that makes Tangled different is its roots in the classic story of Rapunzel, which means that our heroine has really long hair. So long, in fact, that she can use it as a rope or a self-defense tool when she so chooses. In the movie, we also have Flynn Rider, the dashing con man who confesses to Rapunzel that his real name is Eugene, and we find out he's not a bad guy at heart. The cons he pulls off benefit him, yes, but he's quick to let helpless, underprivileged people benefit from them too. He's not a villain after all. In fact, the antagonist is a woman named Mother Gothel who is so caught up with her own vanity that she has to brush Rapunzel's hair every time she wants a facelift. And oh, by the way, Mother Gothel has been lying to Rapunzel, saying she's Rapunzel's mother when she isn't. Right away, we have a couple of big story problems for the characters. The first one is that Rapunzel loves her mother, even if she is a little weird, but she also recognizes that she's a prisoner. The crisis of conscience Rapunzel has about wanting to leave Mother Gothel is very real. Rapunzel knows that when Mother Gothel brushes her hair, it makes her feel better physically. Leaving the tower where she's lived her entire life essentially means that she's taking away her mother's health and well-being. But she also has this burning curiosity about these lights that appear in the sky every year on her birthday. When Eugene climbs into her tower to escape being arrested, she sees a prime opportunity to get all of her questions answered, because deep down, she has the sense that those lights are connected to her somehow. Even with the crisis of conscience and her anxiety at leaving behind the only place she's ever known, she has to know about those lights. She senses they're connected to her fate, and that means that really, Rapunzel's story is about learning who she's destined to be. So this is a story about discovering one's identity, even if it's terrifying, even if it means leaving behind everything familiar to venture into the unknown and the potential for heartbreak there. Both Rapunzel and Eugene have this heart-deep longing to know themselves better. In building characters, it's important to decide what their story is going to be about on the surface, how that reflects what's going on under the surface, and then make their problems bigger than you initially imagined. That's where the real writing magic happens. Another example of this is the brilliant novel Anxious People by Swedish author Fredrik Backman that came out just last month. Unlike some of Backman's other books, this novel features an ensemble cast. All of them are radically different people, but they have one thing in common, which is the main theme running throughout the book. The inciting incident or situation that kicks off all the events is a failed bank robbery. In a small town in Sweden, a thief decides to hold up a bank. The only problem is that all banks in Sweden are now cashless, which the thief didn't know ahead of time, and that also means the bank robber is going to walk away empty-handed. After several moments of panic, the thief runs out of the bank and into an apartment building nearby. There, a real estate agent is holding an open house for a top-floor apartment for sale. The bank robber bursts in and on the spur of the moment takes everyone hostage. Several hours later, all of the hostages are set free. There's just one problem. The thief/hostage taker has disappeared, and the police are trying to figure out what happened. They try interviewing the victims, but weirdly enough, no one is giving the police a straight answer. It's almost as if they're trying to help the bank robber, which really doesn't make any sense at all. If you're finding any of this funny, then that's good, because it's exactly what Backman intended. He wanted to present a serious situation in a lighthearted way, because it's through humor that he could bring to the front the book's main theme. The anxieties we experience in life, our insecurities, may be unique to our particular situations, but they're universal in that we all have them. They also often lead us to do strange and sometimes very stupid things. On the surface, the hostages seem to have nothing in common. One is the president of a bank who actually has no intention of buying the apartment. Another is a little old lady waiting on her husband to park the car, who seems to be taking a really long time. The real estate agent is hoping her plan to hold an open house on the day before New Year's Eve actually yields some results. One couple keeps trying to convince everyone else how terrible the apartment is so no one drives up the price and they can get it cheap. Another couple is expecting their first baby and just now seems to be realizing their lives are going to change. Then there's the man in the rabbit suit. And of course, the bank robber. As I said, at the start of the story, they all seem completely different. Yet as the characters begin to talk, they realize that they're all worried about what's coming next in their individual lives because they genuinely believe they may not survive it, including the bank robber. And through whimsical, intelligent storytelling, Frederick Backman draws us into this unlikely scenario that, by the end of it, has readers nodding along in sympathy. All of it makes sense within the story world Backman has presented because it's relatable and universal, something he excels at in every single book. His books are also a perfect reminder that we don't have to offer earth-shattering, life-altering truths in our works. We just have to know what we want to accomplish in our stories and books and keep our eyes squarely on that. We have to know what the story is about. The third W is where. Where is your story going to take place? The where is going to determine a lot about your character because it will change how your character reacts in a variety of challenges. It may even set the course for the main plot pieces of your novel. A good example of this is Jodi Picoult's newest novel, The Book of Two Ways. The main character, Dawn Edelstein, graduated from Yale with a master's degree and is all ready to spend time in Egypt studying the Book of Two Ways, which is an old text that was often found in coffins. The ancient Egyptians believed that this text would give the dead directions to navigate the afterlife so they could reach the ultimate goal of an eternal feast with the god Osiris. Dawn has had a lifelong fascination, almost obsession, with the Book of Two Ways, and she can't wait to make her contributions to the field of Egyptology by studying these ancient texts firsthand. When she reaches the dig in Egypt, she meets Wyatt Armstrong, a British man who is a member of the extended royal family. Wyatt is just as passionate about the Book of Two Ways, which upsets Dawn at first. Soon enough, love blooms between them. But then sudden circumstances bring Dawn back to the States, and her life turns away from her work in Egypt. She's never forgotten the Book of Two Ways or Wyatt, however. The novel, of course, has to take place in part in Egypt because the story deals so closely with Egyptian culture. It wouldn't make sense for the important parts of the book to take place in, say, Brazil or Australia or Kansas. Dawn has dreamed for years about being in Egypt, participating in a dig, and discovering real-life examples of the Book of Two Ways. Because of that, the book goes to Egypt and stays there in long sections, and it makes sense for it to do so. More than that, when Dawn is forced to leave Egypt, she comes home and becomes a death doula, someone who helps people at the end of their lives prepare for that end. So really, even though she's not in Egypt anymore, the concept and study of death is still very much a part of Dawn's life. If she hadn't been studying death in Egypt and the particular way the Egyptians handled it, this would have been a very different story. The location, the where, matters. Another great example of how the where affects a character is The Indigo Girl by Natasha Boyd. This historical fiction novel is based on a true story and is set before the Revolutionary War in Charlestown, South Carolina. The protagonist, Eliza Lucas, is the daughter of a plantation owner with 3 plantations. When her father's political ambitions take him away from Charlestown, Eliza steps up to run the plantations and oversees the slaves who work it. She doesn't let her age, which is all of 16, nor her gender, stop her. The fact that this book took place in the South before the Revolutionary War sets up many of the traits the characters, especially Eliza, had. This was a time of exploration and new ideas, of trying to follow the rules set down by the British Crown, but also discovering that many of those rules didn't work for a variety of reasons. Eliza has to make a lot of choices, including one of the riskiest ones of all. Her father heavily mortgages 2 of the plantations so he can fund his political campaigns, and the family needs money. Eliza decides to try to grow indigo so she can take advantage of the high profits made from indigo dye, except that it's a well-known fact that growing indigo in South Carolina is almost impossible. But Eliza doesn't care. She's in charge of the plantation while her father is away, and she's going to do what she thinks is best for it. England, in the temperament of its people and its climate, was vastly different from South Carolina. At that time, women were generally supposed to be seen and not heard. But Eliza didn't grow up in England. She's lived most of her formative years in the Caribbean islands and then moved to South Carolina after that. She's committed to helping the plantations and the slaves, even if no one's happy about that last part at all. Had she lived her whole life in England, her attitude would probably have been different. She may have looked down on someone exactly like her. Eliza Lucas proves that where you live can shape who you are and change the course of history, in her case, literally. For a time, South Carolina became a prolific leading producer of indigo dye. Had Eliza still been home in England, she most likely wouldn't have done any of this. Her location and where the story takes place ultimately determines who she is. So give a lot of thought to where you're setting your story and what that does to the people who inhabit it. Our next W is when, as in when are you setting your story? Is a particular era important to your piece? For some stories it is, for others not so much. In many cases, a specific time period will determine many things about your characters. Earlier this year, Carrie Marr's latest novel, The Girl in White Gloves, released, and it's a historical fiction book based on the life of the luminous actress Grace Kelly. For those of you who may not be familiar with her, Grace Kelly was a prominent Hollywood actress in the 1950s. She worked with many famous directors, including Alfred Hitchcock, in his incredible film Rear Window. Grace Kelly was also known as a powerhouse performer and a fashion icon. She was known for marrying the Prince of Monaco and giving up acting at the height of her career. According to the book, Kelly wanted nothing more than to be a successful actress. Yet when she met Prince Rainier, she didn't hesitate to pursue a relationship with him that moved fast and furious. After she got married, directors kept calling her and sending her scripts, but Grace Kelly didn't act in another feature film. Because the book is about a real person, it makes the most sense to keep her anchored in the time period where she lived, unless you're writing a science fiction novel and want to include some time travel elements. But in this case, Grace Kelly's story has the most impact when we see her in real time. In the 1950s, respectable women were expected to get married, have children, and keep house. Grace Kelly fought against this stereotype. She negotiated her own contracts, and before she got married, she didn't hesitate to start or end relationships according to what she felt. Given the restrictions on women at that time, Kelly's story stands out and makes more of an impact. But be sure to carefully consider your story's time period and what else is going on in that time. If you've decided to put your character in the past, make sure you do your due diligence in your research, especially when it comes to technology or even appliances, things that we think of as modern conveniences. Also, be sure to find out when that piece of tech first started getting used regularly. It's not enough just to say when it was invented, because there's almost always a gap between the time something came into existence and when it became embedded in our lives. Take the internet, for example. It was actually in use in the early 1980s, but I grew up in the 80s and no one was going online then. We never even heard the concept. We were still fighting with our cassettes when the tape got tangled and we had to use a pencil to unwind it. It wasn't until much later that people knew what the internet was, how to use it, and now how to take it for granted. And not all stories have to make such a dramatic statement about the era. The when of your story could be the time of day or a particular season of weather. Just make sure to ask yourself what kind of impact it has on your characters. The last W is why. Why have you chosen your particular protagonist to tell the story you need to tell? What about that person makes him or her stand out? Why are they best suited to the events you've got in mind? Veronica Roth, the author of the popular Divergent series, released her first book for adult readers this spring. The novel is called Chosen Ones and follows a group of young 20-somethings. In Roth's story world, 10 years ago, these 5 people fought a negative force called the Dark One. The Dark One was on track to destroy the entire world. He was defeated by the group called the Chosen Ones. The main character of the book is one of the Chosen Ones named Sloane. 10 years after the defeat of the Dark One, Sloane is still trying to make sense of her life. She and the others were teenagers when they finished this unbelievable feat, but it feels like it's followed her around every day since. Roth said she wanted to write the book because she was curious about what happened to a savior-type character after he or she had finished doing the saving. How did that person lead their lives? How did they handle the basics of the day-to-day after accomplishing such big things at a young age? In essence, Roth wanted to answer the question, why should we focus just on what the savior character accomplished? Why can't we look at what that person does after? Her answer to those questions is the novel. Also, another part of the why is, why are you telling this story right now? Is there anything happening in the world today that compels you to pick this story? In November 2019, Mary Higgins Clark's last book came out. It's called Kiss the Girls and Make Them Cry, and it's essentially a Me Too story. A woman is harassed at work, and she's compelled to come forward. The main character of the book is a journalist who gets word of the harassment and decides to do a news piece on it. Of course, this was a Mary Higgins Clark book, so there was definitely murder involved, and in this case, several murders. The Me Too movement is still producing stories, and that's part of what motivated the author. Just after the book came out, Mary Higgins Clark did an interview with USA Today in which she said, "As a writer, I want to create a story about a topic people are interested in and talking about at the time their work is being published. I also wanted to add an additional element to the Me Too stories that have received so much publicity." With this novel, Clark made the reporter, Gina, the protagonist, instead of the victim. Readers do get to hear from the victim and from the harasser as well as his fixer, but Gina's the one taking the lead. Clark also chose to give Gina a relationship that's kind of on its last legs. She said, "I wanted to give Gina increasingly a feeling of being alone," she said about investigating what had happened. This is really interesting because Gina is in some ways feeling what the victim is feeling, isolated. Gina feels like she's in a place where she's the only one who understands what's happening to her, and she doesn't know what to do about it. But because of her journalism training, she has the ability to pursue the story about the sexual harassment with a single-mindedness and a determination to help the victim get justice. By making Gina her protagonist, Mary Higgins Clark keeps the larger narrative of the movement and its effects going. So consider carefully why you're choosing the character you have in mind for the story you want to write, how the story will impact the character, and why this character is the best person for it. Finally, the H, the how. How do we do all of this and write compelling characters? Let's get into that now. In fact, it's going to be really easy to do because we're going to go back to where we started tonight, the 5 W's and an H. We can use them to start putting together the key elements of our characters. So let's start from the top with our first W, who. Only this time we're going to break it down to the basics. One of the first things to decide is who will you choose, and I mean this in the most literal sense. Will it be an adult or a child? Will it be male, female, or someone who self-identifies? When you think about who the character is, start with this simple fact, then give this person a name and an age. Next on the list is what, and we can apply the what to several different things. First, what does your character look like? You don't have to plan out every single facial feature, but it helps to be able to picture this person. Sometimes when I'm working on characters, I try to think of someone from TV or films who looks like the personality I'm trying to portray. Whatever works for you, decide on their physical appearance. Are they tall, short, or medium height? What's their eye color? What kind of clothes do they wear? What in their lives enables that wardrobe? For example, if your character is well-heeled, do they have a profession that pays well? If they're a shabby dresser, is that a reflection of their financial status or their personality? What does your character do all day? If they're an adult, are they working? If they're a child, do they go to school? What do they think about their current working or educational status? Finally, and most importantly, what do they want that they can't have at the beginning of the story? Eliza, in the Indigo Girl, wants the respect of the men in her life for running the plantations and solving a major problem. Harry Potter wants security in the form of a home with a loving family. Rapunzel, in Tangled, wants to know what her destiny is and whether the lights in the sky on her birthday are connected to her. So ask yourself, what does your character, deep down inside, want more than anything else that they can't have? Third, where does your character live? Do they live in a house, a hotel, on the street? Do they live in a particular city or state? Does their location affect who they are? For example, in the Southeast, every year on June 1st, an article is published with all the proposed names of hurricanes for the year. I grew up on the coast in South Carolina, and hurricanes are a way of life there. People know how to board up windows, store water, and even manage a handful of days without electricity by cooking on a grill and sitting tight. When something is a part of your normal yearly routine, you deal with it head on without really thinking about it. The where can also refer to where the characters will spend the bulk of the story. For a novel, this could be several locations, but for a short story, the characters may not move from a single room or building. That choice can make the characters do and say unusual things that contribute to the story overall. This summer, right after the start of hurricane season, the historical novel The Last Train to Key West by Chanel Cleeton was released. It's about 3 women in Key West who come to major crossroads in their individual lives, all while one of the biggest hurricanes in history is bearing down on the island getaway. An added layer of tension comes from the fact that the Great Depression is going on with no end in sight and has devastated so many lives. A novel about the Depression could have taken place anywhere. Cleeton chose to set hers during a real-life hurricane and also examined the real-life veteran camps that were set up in Florida for soldiers who came back after World War I. Both of these facts make the where of the story, the island of Key West, crucial. The book makes the impact it does because of how vulnerable islands are during these huge storms. So think about where your character lives and where they're going to spend the most important moments of the story. The next W is when. When does your character start to change? If you like to plot ahead of time, you need to think about this carefully. If you don't like to plot, just be aware that this is a necessary element of writing. Without change, your character really becomes just a to-do list. Went to work, picked up some milk, came home, walked the dog, microwaved dinner, watched American Idol, went to bed. All of our lives are like that, on the normal days anyway, right? But readers don't want to experience normal. They're living it just like we are. They want to find out what's abnormal about the characters, what stands out. That can only happen if we make our characters change through big story problems. Maybe they won't go from Quaker to Navy SEAL, but they'll be fundamentally different forever as a result of what happened to them. Some writing experts say a good way to incorporate this is to start the story on the day that everything changes. When the routine changes, then the character will have to change too. If we take our to-do list from before, went to work, picked up milk, came home, walked the dog, microwaved dinner, watched American Idol, went to bed, and start tweaking it a little, we'll find out pretty quickly when our character starts to change. Maybe it'll be right at the start when our character goes to work. Let's say they arrive and discover that they were let go, or the building's on fire, or there's been a shooting. Or maybe the change happens when they come home. The door is standing open and the dog's missing. Maybe the routine gets disrupted when they're microwaving dinner and they're so tired they put in the wrong numbers and the meal explodes. Or maybe when they sit down to watch American Idol, the show gets interrupted by a local news bulletin about a murderer on the loose, and the character realizes they're looking at a mugshot of their ex. Any of those disruptions to the character's routine will make them react. After they react, they'll have a choice of what to do next. Either go back to their routine or take action. Most compelling characters will take action for sure, even if that action is as simple as double-checking the locks on the doors and windows after the news bulletin. The character's suddenly out of their normal routine, because that simple action will cause another reaction. If you see your ex on TV as a confirmed murderer, I don't know about you, but I definitely won't be sleeping that night. So the reaction is that the character gets a bad night's sleep. Maybe they sleep through their alarm the next morning. They react again. They bolt up in bed and freak out over the time. Then they make the choice to start flying through their morning routine. We've all been there, right? The adrenaline is pumping so hard that all of our attention is on getting dressed and out the door. It isn't until sometime later that we start to process what happened and why. This is a prime spot for another pressure point or another moment of change. Maybe this is the morning they're let go because they missed a big deadline and their company lost an important account. What do they do next? All of a sudden, as you can see, our character's thrown off balance. They've begun to change. Smart writers will continue to build on that change bit by bit by throwing more challenges and more story problems in the character's path. Co-authors Greer Hendricks and Sarah Buchanan did a fantastic job of this in their new release, You Are Not Alone, that came out this year. Their protagonist, Shay Miller, is a data analyst in New York City who's recently been let go from her permanent job and is temping. The wed moment for her is when she witnesses a woman committing suicide by jumping in front of the subway. This makes Shay change everything about her routine, and it affects the way she thinks, her sleep, even her morals. Without that big moment, Shay would have most likely still been stuck living in that apartment with her former boyfriend, who she still loves, but who has a new girlfriend. She would have still been spending her days collecting interesting but useless bits of trivia about the world in her little data notebook. When she sees someone make such a drastic decision with their own life, it alters her own worldview forever. But when does your character start to change? When does your character choose to act? Be sure to keep that in mind. Our last W deals with the why. Why is your character in this situation? Why will it change them? Earlier this year, I read Logging Off by British author Nick Spalding. It's a humorous novel that could almost be classified as satire about a man named Andy Bellows who decides to go on a digital detox. Andy's addicted to his devices and social media. He likes to play video games and have spirited discussions on Facebook about whether a particular row of houses should be torn down. He also likes to follow social media influencers who give lots of great life advice while posing on their expensive cars. As a freelance graphic designer, Andy spends a lot of time doing presentations to potential clients. On the morning of one of these presentations, he has a headache and severe pain in his neck, but he tries to ignore both. He can't let his biggest rival in the area win this contract, even though it's for a London fashion house that thinks wearing sheer shower curtains is cutting edge. So Andy takes some painkillers and goes to the presentation. Just when he's in the middle of it, though, his jaw locks up, and then his irritable bowel syndrome kicks in, and he makes it to the bathroom barely in time. A visit to the doctor's office gives Andy the worst diagnosis of his life. He's suffering from too much social media and device usage, and his doctor is recommending that he quit cold turkey for a while. His doctor gives him a pamphlet and tells him to come back in a month. As Andy reads the pamphlet, he shares his observations. If I truly have to follow all of the advice given here, I think I'm going to go crazy. As if on cue, a stabbing sharp pain shoots through my temple again, reminding me what this is all about. It's either stabbing pain or a return to the Dark Ages. I'm not so sure which is worse, to be honest with you. Andy loves his social media and his devices, but they're exactly why his health is sliding. So even though it just might kill him, he's going to have to quit it all to get better. The why of his situation, why he got into it, is obvious. And of course, we can already predict why it's going to change him. Asking the questions gives us key pieces to the characters and also the stories we're trying to tell. And finally, the how. How will this story impact your character? How will they change forever? I know plotters like to plot their stories ahead of time, and pantsers like to sit and just let the words flow. They fly by the seat of their pants. But no matter what path you follow, which way you write, I can almost guarantee that if you don't know, even in the vaguest sense, how your story is going to affect your main character by the end, the chances are pretty high that you won't finish that story. Even if you have no other idea about how the story is going to progress, you should, at the very least, decide how your character will change by the end. Because really, the best stories are about changes in our characters. How do they become different people? How are they better or worse? How far have they come in their personal journeys? It's only after answering these questions that you can get to know your characters better. When you know your characters better, even if you don't spell out every single answer in your stories, you'd be amazed at how the information comes out, even at a subconscious level. I'd like to wrap up tonight with some last thoughts and also share some resources that I found have been immensely helpful to me in building good characters. First, I want to touch on the subject of research. Whether you're writing a character from contemporary times or from a historical period, if there are aspects of the character's life that impacts them in a direct way, like maybe they have some sort of disability or illness, or maybe they work in a specialized field, then taking some time to do some research on those areas will actually help you develop your characters even further. Keep in mind, the amount of research you do should be in proportion to the length of your story, and you have to be careful not to spend time down too many rabbit holes, no matter how much fun they might be. But doing research makes your character and your story that much more authentic. The more authenticity you can bring to a story through your character and their surroundings, the better your story is going to be, and the more engaged your reader will be. To that end, I know this might sound like obvious advice, but please don't rely on Wikipedia or the very first website in an online search to answer all of your questions about historical eras or other things like that. Your best way to avoid getting dinged by readers and later editors and publishers is by spending time checking several sources. It's okay to use Wikipedia as a springboard, get a very general, very basic idea of what's going on, but then turn around and verify everything you've read by going to other sources. If you've got a question about a country, type that country's name in your search engine and see if their government has a website. You could consult travel websites by that country, or check out a few trusted news resources like the AP Newswire or Reuters about the place you want to research. Even better, talk to our librarians and spend some time going through the online catalog. And now that it's actually safe to do so, you can go to the library as well. You'd be amazed at the resources and help you find when you open paper books. And here are 3 bonus facts when it comes to research. First, if the Champaign Library can't find what you need in-house, you're allowed to use your existing library card to borrow materials from other libraries. It's called an interlibrary loan, and that means our library here will do its best to track down the book or material you need within the network it shares with other libraries. You might have to pay a fee to borrow that item, but if it means the difference between your story sounding authentic or not, I say the fee is worth it. Bonus fact number 2. As residents of Illinois, we're allowed to get cards for the U of I library. Just think of it. We have the resources of a world-class library right at our fingertips. You may not necessarily feel the need to do that level of research for a short story, but if you're working on a novella or a book-length project, this could be a goldmine of information. The only caveat is that right now, due to the pandemic, the U of I library is not issuing new cards, but I would definitely file this information away for the future so that you can get a library card when it is safe to do so and go and spend time in the stacks. It would definitely be worth it. Bonus fact number 3. In February, the Smithsonian Institution announced that it put nearly 3 million images online for free to view and download. These images come from all 19 of the institution's museums, its 9 research centers, libraries, archive centers, and the National Zoo. Just think of all the story ideas and verification you can get just by digging into these images. Also, while many people don't realize it, the Library of Congress and the National Archives are also rich resources for writers who need to look into artifacts or historical events. And just like with our library here, both the Library of Congress and the National Archives have librarians and subject experts who are willing to spend time with you over the phone or email to help you find what you need. I'd also like to show you some books I turn to the most when I'm looking for help with characters. First up is The Emotion Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. It works just like a regular thesaurus does. Start by searching for an emotion. When you open to the page of that emotion, you'll find its definition followed by physical signals and behaviors of that emotion. You know how we keep trying to describe our characters as having wide eyes when they're shocked? Well, there are other ways that shock shows itself in body language and behavior, and the Emotion Thesaurus can help with that. It tells you internal sensations, which is perfect when you're locked in a particular character's point of view and need to show how they're feeling. There are also mental responses, long-term responses, signs that the emotion is being suppressed or pushed down, and then the book cross-references other emotions. If we look up the word shock, we'll see that shock may escalate to disbelief, disgust, anger, humiliation, or anguish. Then there are page numbers for all of those emotions. Same thing happens in reverse. Shock de-escalates to regret, sadness, and resignation. And again, there are page numbers for each of those. There are even power verbs so that you can say more than just that a character looked shocked. Now they can gape or stutter or retreat. This is one of my most favorite resources. When I was working on all 10 drafts of my novel last year, this book didn't leave my desk. If you don't use any other resources, any other resource, I'd strongly urge you to buy this one and buy it, to use this one and buy it for yourself. Or you could ask for it for a birthday or Christmas gift, but definitely add it to your reference books as soon as possible because it is just that good. The second book that is also a huge help in building characters is The Writer's Guide to Character Traits by Dr. Linda Eaglestein. This is a really interesting book because it's written by psychologists specifically for writers to use in understanding people and applying that information to building three-dimensional characters. Eaglestein offers profiles of personality types, examines the characteristics of children and adults in a variety of situations, provides traits associated with specific careers, and more. She also includes case studies to illustrate how people think, feel, and react in various circumstances. And she goes into the effects of romantic and family relationships on people. Writers can read about early childhood influences and how one major event can steer a possible antagonist's personality toward negative activities and thoughts. Combining the information in this book with your own imagination, you can build grounded, realistic characters. And finally, third, Take Off Your Pants. Outline your books for faster, better writing by Libby Hawker. The character building techniques in this book can help you lay the foundation for the important people in your story. Hawker takes writers through a simple process of deciding who will lead your stories and what makes them who they are. When used with the other books that I'm recommending, this book can offer writers a jump start on deciding what's important to highlight in their characters. Even if you don't outline anything else according to the way Libby Hawker recommends, the character section in this book is definitely worth the investment. In conclusion, I'd like to say that strong plots are the engines for good stories, but without strong characters in the driver's seat, your piece won't really get anywhere. I hope all these questions and resources help you in building your own characters. In conclusion, as I like to say every time, one of my passions in life is to help other writers. So please don't hesitate to get in touch and follow me on social media. I truly believe that words have the fundamental power to change people and the world. And if you're looking for an editor, it would be my honor to work with you on your writing project to make it as polished as it can possibly be. Please do stay in touch, and thank you so much for your time this
Thank you, Ekta. So now is the time you can type a question for Ekta in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Let's see if we have any questions. So far, someone just said thank you.
You're welcome, my pleasure. And if you have questions that come up later, don't hesitate to email me. I'm happy to answer questions by email. I know sometimes it's hard to talk over Zoom about a specific project, so I'm always happy to answer specific questions over email. I love talking writing. I could do this all day, all night if my family let me. So.
Someone says, another great lesson. Thanks. And P.S. I loved Indigo Girl too.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It was, it was a book that kind of fell into my lap. I didn't really hear a lot about it. Didn't hear a lot of buzz, but I really enjoyed it. The fact that it was about South Carolina, I had that personal connection, but it was really fascinating to me to learn about, Eliza and how she really took charge of plantations. So I'm glad that you liked it as well.
Someone says, can you put up the slide with the websites for research again?
Sure. Let me go back. These are the ones for the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, and the National Archives. And I'm happy to go back to the others. Another thing that I will say is that on Tuesday, I will put a condensed version of all of these notes, including the websites, on my blog. So I will definitely be putting that up, and you can access it from there. But yes, if you need other websites right now, I'm happy to put those up as well.
Thank you. So another question come in. So they are asking, if you have two main characters, how do you figure out which one is the protagonist? More specifically, If it's a book aimed at children, is the child always the protagonist?
If it's a book that's intended for children, for child readers, usually the protagonist will be a child. It's easier for kids to relate to how kids think. You know, and it might be easy for us as adults to remember what our childhoods were like, but kids don't have the benefit of that life experience yet. So just to create an easy gateway for them to get into the story, almost always the protagonist of a children's book is a child. And in terms of two main characters, you know, I see a lot of books and I read a lot of books where the narrative is shared. I just actually finished one, I reviewed one today on my blog called One by One by Ruth Ware. And the narrative goes back and forth between two characters. But I think if you really dig into your characters, ask these questions that we've talked about tonight, and spend some time sort of going over in your mind what the story is about, you'll probably realize that one of them actually is the main character, is the actual protagonist, and the other one is a very strong supporting character. So they have almost the same level of importance in the story that the protagonist does. But generally, in a book or a short story, there's usually one person who changes the most, who benefits the most or doesn't benefit the most from whatever happens in the story. So I think you should really ask yourself who benefits the most or who changes the most by the end of the story, and that person will be the protagonist usually, and the other person who kind of functions almost like a second protagonist will actually just be a really strong supporting character.
Thank you. We have someone raising their hand. Susan, I'm going to unmute you, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. My story has a main character who's a protagonist, and the rest of the characters are animals,
Okay.
and a plant, and a grandson that somehow got turned into a pumpkin, and I got to figure out how to get him out of there.
Okay.
And so the only other characters are at the end, when I have to go to a Native American reservation and have the medicine man turn him back into a boy.
Okay. So what's exactly the question?
Well, do I need to develop the crows, my service dog, which are other characters? The service dog's a character, the crows are a character, my grandson's a character for a while till he messes up and turns into a pumpkin. And the pumpkins that I have to talk to, because I don't know where he's at.
Right.
I think the pumpkins took him. The crows told me that, and so the pumpkins that I have to interrogate, do I give them some kind of characters?
I think if
I mean, I'm really basically talking to myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody or anything in a story that is going to change the story in some way, change the direction of the story, or change something for the main character, the protagonist, I would definitely spend some time developing them. Now, you know, for example, if you have a story where you have two people meeting at a restaurant, and you know, a waiter walks in and puts down drinks and walks away, and that's the only time we ever see that waiter, and nothing that waiter has done really changes the trajectory of the story, you don't have to spend time developing that person. But if the waiter does something that changes which direction the story is going to go in, you know, if that person is a part of the conflict in some way, maybe the people sitting at the table one of them knows the waiter, then it's beneficial to spend some time developing them. So you really have to kind of decide what level of importance do your different characters have, animals have, and the other objects, what importance do they have, and then develop accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have given them different voices.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the pumpkins are like really very short sentences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The crows, our minds can meld together so we can talk like humans in long sentences.
Oh.
And my dog is mostly commands,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandson, I'm mostly yelling at him. Yeah, yeah. But so I've changed all the voices, but I think all my characters have something to do with my story. I don't have any non-important characters, I don't think.
Yeah, so I would definitely spend some time developing them, asking why are they important to the story? What do they contribute to the story? And another question to ask, what would happen if I pulled this person or animal or object out of the story? Would it change? And if so, then that's a clue that character is important, and you do need to spend some time sort of digging into who or what they are and why they're important and how that.
So I basically finished my story, and I sent it to my brother to read. He hasn't read it yet, so I'm trying to get some feedback with that. But you said you did. Do you read these stories and give us ideas, or?
I definitely can. If you want to email me, we can talk more about that in depth over email, and we can decide what kind of attention your project needs. Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you. While we see there, someone's asking, would you list the books you mentioned this evening?
Oh, okay. Are you talking about the books, the writing resources, or the fictional books? I can do both. But
Fiction. They said fiction.
there's a lot of good ones. So I mentioned Anxious People by Frederick Backman, and Indigo Girl by Natasha Boyd. There's one of the last ones that I talked about was called You Are Not Alone. That has two authors, Greer Hendricks and Sarah Buchanan. And let's see, what else did I talk about? I talked about Tangled, but that's not a book. Let me do this. If you email me, I can send you the list. I can pull it off of my notes instead of me sitting and fumbling for all of them. I can definitely email you the list, and so you can enjoy them, because there's some really good ones in there. So please do email me, and I'm happy to send them to you. I'm going to pull up the slide again with my email and contact information. So touch base with me, and I will let you know what they are.
Thank you. They also said thank you.
You're welcome.
While we're waiting for if there's one more question, I'm gonna quickly share my screen, give one more update about so our short story contest, our second annual short story contest is now open, accepting submissions now through November 6th. So you can find more information at champaign.org/short-story, including entry guidelines, prize information, and the form itself. So November 6th is the date for that. Our next workshop will be on October 21st. It will be plot development presented by Nadine Kenny Johnstone. So make sure you register for that as well. So I don't see any more questions in the chat or anyone raising their hand. So with that, we are nearing the end of our workshop. I want to say a big thank you to Ekta for leading another great webinar. That was wonderful.
Welcome, my pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. And yeah, and we'll be in touch, like Ekta said, when her notes are ready from the workshop. She'll either send it to me, or if you have her email, she can send it to you directly, but you can always reach out to us and we will provide that for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.